how do we deal with religious or community leaders or people in positions of power who exhibit these narcissistic behaviors, and how as a community do we deal with that? Because it is detrimental. People are kicked out of I've seen this firsthand, that people are kicked out of certain communities because of a power-hungry narcissist in power, right? And how they mistreat and how they slander and how all of that. So what are your thoughts around that? How as a community can we help with this or deal with it and cope with it?
Yeah, you had a actually beautiful discussion with Haj Hassanein the other day about, slander and backbiting in the community and exploitation and how to deal with that. And the one thing I really like that you both touched on that I want to bring up again is the whole idea that, this is nothing new. This using the role of a religious leader to try to exploit others and to gain power. We have seen this. The Quran talks about generation upon generation of individuals like this who wear the clothing of garb of someone who's pious and religious, and yet they're manipulating the system. It's like, again, to talk about an analogy here, it's like many times what people don't realize is in sexual abuse cases, for example, it's not the stranger danger that's the problem. Usually it's somebody that the family has trusted. Right. Somebody, it's a relative, it's somebody that's been invited into the home who's had a chance to groom the child in the home, right? And so what often happens is we just need to become self-aware more as a community, that just because this person wears an amama and he speaks a lot about Islam and he's such a person of authority and power and respect in the community doesn't mean you can trust him. You don't trust somebody just because they have a certain persona and wear a uniform. You right. know, if anything, these people many times will take advantage of that power. And so this spiritual abuse is something that I have come across. And it's what's most important is to just be self-aware in these situations. Don't put yourself in a situation that feels, you have a gut feeling in your fitra that this isn't right. This man is inviting me to his hotel for a spiritual discussion after an event. Spiritual. I'm sure it's very spiritual.
I'm sure.
You gotta also see some red flags here and not put yourself, I'm not victim blaming at all. I hold these people fully accountable. I want to make that clear, but it's important to protect yourself.
Be aware. Yes. Yeah, the red flags are there, and that can be actually a whole discussion on its own that we could look into one day, because I know there's a lot of mainstream media out there, non-Muslim media, who have gotten a wind of what these temporary relationships are all about and abuse within the Muslim community with religious leaders, and they're doing documentaries on this to expose Muslim sheikhs. And if anything, it looks like more of like an Islamophobic attack. I think we need to change the narrative on that as Muslims and as women and men working together to talk about this, first of all, because we know when it comes to racism, discrimination, sexism, misogyny, any of these types of ism, that you need to acknowledge that it's happening. We cannot deny, because the more you push, deny, and put it aside, the more will come back and hit you harder. I was just doing a program on racism earlier, and the research that I came across, and we know this as therapists, that the more you push something aside, the more it will have mental health issues and detrimentals later on. So you need to first acknowledge that it is happening. We know that it's happening within our communities. What are we doing about it? We're pushing it aside to the point that you have people outside of the community who've heard about this from, let's say, converts, reverts, or people who have been abused, who are speaking about it to other mediums, because our own community and narcissistic religious powers, or whatever you want to call it, are not listening. And then so they go and have people listening to them who have the means and the power to expose, but they have their own agendas, perhaps Islamophobic agendas or whatever it is, to hurt people. So then when it's gone in that direction, our narrative is taken. And especially, let's say, if the victims are women, it's no longer focused on the victims and helping and supporting them. But now there's almost a narcissistic media involved here in terms of, look at these Muslims, look at what they do, look at how they hurt others, look at how they abuse, look at ABC. So the narrative is taken away here from the women who are abused and exposed in a way of it just becomes a mess. It becomes a dirty, nasty mess, and away from the core issue of the victims here, right? And this is where, again, as Muslims, we need to take back the narrative, acknowledge that it's happening, have measures in place for people who abuse this power, who abuse their position and do not value and respect the position that they're blessed to be in by hurting others. There is a day where all of your sins will be exposed. There is a day, we know this, like whatever you do and hurt onto others is going to come back and haunt you, right? And I think for far too long, like you said, Sister Anisa, this has been happening since the beginning of time. But I think it's gone on far too long as well within our communities. By the way, this is not just men with women. This is women who also do this as well. And we know this firsthand as therapists, right, sister, that those who are abusive is not just men. So I just want to make that clear in case people start saying, why are you just hating on men here? I'm not. The reality happens to both. But again, most people who are in positions of power are the males. And we see this. And it's so vital. You can see I'm very passionate about it because we've seen so many victims, too many victims who are hurt and taken advantage of in this. But now, like I said, there are other medias that have heard about this and other platforms who want to do documentaries around this. This is just exposing things in the wrong way. As Muslims, we need to take the narrative back. We need to take control of our story, and as women as well. And then it all has to do with education, right? So sister, when you're talking about red flags, we're not victim blaming here. We are bringing awareness to something. Women, you need to be more aware of these red flags, just like the example that Sister Anisa gave. If he's inviting you to a hotel for a spiritual discussion, really? Is that a spiritual discussion? So these are things I think a lot of us need to be a little bit more aware of. And it's very hard when you're dealing with this type of personality, because again, like you said, Sister Anisa, they are putting themselves in a position of being trusted, charismatic. They would never do anything to harm anybody. Meanwhile, they could be using their charitable organization as a cover, right? To show how good they are. But meanwhile, they are these evil, black-hearted people. Allah only knows, but their actions are seen through the other people that they've hurt and victimized.